Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is Katherine Anne Stewart-Kelly, Cullum number 43722. We'll hear about her journey from being the Brigade Spirit Captain to a Dallas cop, and finally to being an expert in commercial insurance. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization, most particularly the travelers' insurance companies. Katherine Anne Stewart-Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
AKA KASK.
KASK.
KASK. Yeah, I didn't make that. I finally have a really cool cadet nickname. I did go
back and look at the howitzer because I do have one of those laying around. And apparently they called you Squeaks.
And there is a story behind that.
Tell us the story of Squeaks, if you can.
If you can. Okay. Yeah, sure. So it's really simple. If you've ever heard me call cadence, you would know why I'm called Squeaks. Yeah, and I loved to call cadence. I just loved it. So East Derrick, out at Buckner. And out at Buckner, we had a lot more chances to call cadence. And yeah, I would call cadence every time I was given the opportunity. And then one day I decided maybe I shouldn't do this anymore because all the guys in the platoon answered me in falsetto. And then that's when Squeaks. My Beast Barracks platoon sergeant said, "Cadet Stewart, are you going to try out for rabble rousers?" I had no idea what rabble rousers were.
Really?
And I said, "Sir, I do not understand." And he said, "I think you should." Yeah. So he dared me to try out for rabble rousers during Beast.
We'll just jump right to that. You were a rabble rouser from plebe year all the way through Cal year, right?
Well, I was actually the Brigade Spirit Captain. That was like a real position.
That's a big deal. Right.
So I was on brigade staff, and the officer in charge of all the spirit functions told me, "Oh, in this position, you probably should, not be a rabble rouser this year, focus on doing the other stuff." And it is a decision I regret because I loved being a rabble rouser.
So what was the Spirit Captain? And talk about that.
We had to plan all those spontaneous rallies.
Yeah,
They were timed down to the minute, and I had to brief the comm.
It is the military after all.
Oh, yeah.
Even the spontaneity is planned.
All the spontaneity was planned, and I had to go up to General Boylan once a week. I think it was like Wednesday or Thursday, just in case he wanted to nix anything, and I would brief him on what was going to happen Friday night at the spontaneous rally. And
love that.
That was always fun. I was terrified the first time. And I remember I went into his office and I was prepared, but I didn't have any visuals or anything. And he said, "Stewart, you should bust out the crayons and do a real, briefing." So the next time I brought flip charts and crayons, and he thought that was really funny. I was a bogus first as well as a bogus police.
Yeah. It was like a brigade staff position that was appointed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I lived down on brigade staff first semester. Mary Bell Houston was my
amazing
roommate. Yeah.
But it was the whole year.
The position was the whole year, but after you don't do as much in the second semester. So second semester I got to go live back up with the Buffaloes. So that was nice.
It's basically about the football game and Army Navy. Let's just call it.
It was other stuff too. RMC weekend and all the Navy winter weekend, spring weekend, we did stuff too. But yeah, most of the work was in the fall.
Bristol, Connecticut, back 78 to 82, a young KASK before she became KASK, before she became Squeaks. What was the thinking at that point?
Oh, God. So what got me thinking about West Point? This is actually a good story because I remember the exact moment that I started to think about West Point. So take us back to 1980, the end of my sophomore year in high school. It's May. We'd gone to church. We're sitting around the table back home, and my dad always had dibs on Parade magazine. And so we're just sitting there, and he sat at the head of the table, and I sat there's only four of us, so, it was an easy reach. But he had the Parade magazine. I think I was reading the comics, and he pushed the comics down, and he plops Parade magazine in front of me, and he says, "You could do that." And the cover of Parade magazine was the first woman graduate from West Point. Like, she was on the cover. And I had never even heard of West Point. I mean, if I had, I totally clueless. So I read the article and I was like, oh, think I could do that.
I could do
I
that.
think I could. And it wasn't like a huge stretch. I mean, I was the only girl on my cross country team in high school. And I never came in last in a race. I was very proud of that. I always beat at least one slow plodding guy. And I did a lot in high school. So I thought I could totally do that. And I didn't think very much of it until we took the PSATs. And I don't know who got these invites, but based on our PSAT scores, I got invited to an academic workshop at West Point, and I got invited to one at Navy.
Huh.
And my parents said, well, you have to pick one. You can't go to both. And so I picked West Point because I'm like, it's closer. And I read that article. Yay. And I just fell in love with the place. My parents were really, really encouraging, especially my dad. And what's funny is people are like, well, you have to know a congressman, like people who've not been to any of the service academy. They're like, oh, that was really good, but you must have known somebody. I'm like, I didn't know anybody. Cool.
How did you prepare for the academy? Were you one of those diligent, learned how to do things and shine shoes, or did you just show up like the rest of us?
I had to get my hair cut because somebody had warned me. There was a gal in the class of 85 who was from Bristol, and she said, look, if you come, get your hair cut before our day, because my hair was down to my butt.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And so I did get my hair cut, and my mother's hairdresser came to the house, and she's like, okay, it's going to be hard to take care of it in the summer when you're in basic training. So we're not just going to cut it. We're going to go ahead and do a little body perm. And so it was really great when she first did it, because it was kind of like a lady dye cut, and that was a big deal back then, lady dye. And of course, first time I get in the shower and come out at West Point and we've got like 5 minutes to get ready, I just looked, it changed so much that my squad leader would make me stand in the hallway and sing, the sun will come out tomorrow, because I look just like Annie.
That lady die cut didn't quite handle the
yeah.
the West
It's funny. I was kind of oblivious to most of the hazing though in Beast Barracks, because I was so clueless. There were times when I look back and I'm like, I had no idea I was actually being hazed. And I think that's why my squad would go, hey, Stewart, you go find out what the meals are tomorrow. Okay, go down to the first sergeant's board and find out what the meals are. And I remember standing in front of the board and I'm writing down all the information. The first sergeant steps out of his room and he says, hey, Roach. And I'm still writing. He's like, Roach. And I'm like, oh, I think he's talking to me. I turned to him and I said, sir, my name is new Cadet Stewart. And he didn't know what to do with me. And he goes,
you just, all the yelling and screaming and all that, you just kind of floated along. You didn't really take it to heart.
It was like, so again, my dad was probably like the best father to have for somebody going to West Point, especially a woman. He knew enough that when, he did his research kind of for me.
Sure.
And he said, he's like, look, it's you're going to go through some tough times, especially in this Beast Barrack thing. So just remember, it's all a game. Nobody can touch you. Nobody can hit you. They can yell at you all day long. When it stops feeling like a game, you call me, I'll come get you. And knowing that I had that out really helps. He was great.
Which plebe company did you go to?
So that's an interesting story. So I started off in F1.
Okay.
And I got a frat slug.
Okay.
So they made the grand decision. Thank God it was only like 2 or 3 months, maybe 2 months before graduation. They moved me to B1, Boys 1.
Okay.
They moved me, and
first regiment. So
I was in first reg, yeah.
So how did that attitude of it's a game and your dad's great preparation prepare you for plebe year? I mean, then the plebe part was probably even less intense, right?
Oh yeah, like I said, it was I was a bogus plebe, and I tried to make it fun. Oh yeah, like when we had to do
nobody in the podcast, yes, is reminding me of that phrase. I love that. The bogus.
Oh, bogus? Yeah, I was a totally bogus plebe. Oh, and I would push the limits.
B4 was your yearling rotation, and you're kind of a legendary company. You're a very close group. You all keep.
Oh my God, we are.
B4 is a legendary company. You guys are all very close. You get together. You still have reunions together. You're a model for a group that came together. Right? How was that cemented when you were all at the academy?
Wow. Probably because we had all been bogus plebes. I don't know. We just, we were such a spirited company. And I don't know if it's because we had more than our share of rabble rousers and
Right.
athletes. I mean, we just, I'm not really, honest to God, I don't know. It just seemed like we all belonged together. We had a good time. And, the folks that we had as plebes when we were yearlings, you remember they did not scatter them. And
Mhm.
it still stayed pretty tight. Like we had our plebes with us. I think it was, one of those years.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, no, I think we just, the personalities, we gelled, we wore buffalo hats or
Right.
I only got to wear one once because I was usually cheering. Um, but I helped, but it was, you took your black tar bucket
Hmm.
and we got brown fuzzy toilet seat covers. Remember you could get those, like your grandma had them back in the 80s,
Right.
and put the brown toilet seat cover over. And then we borrowed the little pom poms from A4 and C4 so that we had buffalo horns. And so the buffaloes went to games in our
With
buffalo gear.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And
What did you
yeah.
study while you were? What was your course of study? Did you
Oh, I was actually a French major. And I do regret
really?
to this day that we didn't have to declare majors. Do you remember that? We could say we had a concentration
Yeah, yeah.
and they would put on your diploma that you had a BS in general engineering.
Right.
And I have a Bachelor of Science in French.
And did were you in the
And
French club? I know you were busy with your spirit activities, but did you?
that's funny. I was not in the French club. I did go to Morocco though for a foreign academy exchange. Yeah,
Good
cow
for
year
you.
over spring break. Yeah, I went with Trey Tuminello and Pat Antonetti and Dave DeRoche. Dave DeRoche was our lone Arabic speaker,
Right.
and we went to Morocco for a week, and it was fabulous.
Where was the Moroccan Academy? Which city were you in?
Oh God, Meknes. That's
Okay.
where if I remember correctly, the academy's in Meknes, but
Okay.
we went to Casablanca, we went to Rabat, the capital,
Neat.
we went to Fez.
What was the most interesting thing you did while you were on that exchange?
Oh my gosh, the most interesting thing.
From a military perspective.
Again, from a military. Okay, so probably the most interesting thing was, the Moroccans back in the 80s, they were neutral.
Hmm.
So although I feel like they kind of lean to the West,
Sure.
we saw this display of a dog and pony show of a lot of their armor and their other mechanized capabilities. And I'm just a little cadet taking pictures with my Olympus camera. And I was told to stop taking pictures because that stuff was Russian. They were like, you don't get to take pictures of that.
Right.
But it was interesting.
What? So was military police? What were your options? What was your thinking around becoming a military police officer?
Ah, So again, my dad was a big influence there because
Okay.
I wanted to go aviation. I was so psyched about going aviation. I wanted to fly a helicopter. I thought I'd get it. I was told my legs were too short. You cannot be a pilot. Like, we're not putting little risers on the pedals for
Was
you.
that
So
a valid? That was a valid
apparently
disqualifying. Is
so.
your legs are too short?
That was the reason they gave me. Like, my feet would not be able to do everything I needed to do with the pedals because my
Okay.
legs are short. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was, I was bummed for about this long.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad came down for something. We lived, I was from Connecticut, so it was about an hour and 15 minutes to West Point from our house. So my parents came all the time. They fed a lot of cadets, and a lot of cadets got fed at my house. But my dad came down, and we had dinner, and I was telling him, I don't know what I'm going to do. And of course, we couldn't go infantry then. And he said, you should really look for a branch where you get the same kind of leadership opportunities as the men. So what branch is going to do that for you? Is it going to be quartermaster? Is it going to be transportation? And I said, I might as well go all out. What's the closest organization to infantry that I can get? And the MPs fit the bill. And he also, we were talking about it while we were having dinner, and he said, well, that's good because, then if you decide maybe I want to go JAG, maybe I want to do something like that,
Sure.
you probably got a better chance from the MPs than somewhere else. So, so I went MPs and I never looked back. I loved
Quite
it.
a logical way to go about it. That's really great. Your dad helped you think that through.
Oh, like I said, my dad was a great West Point parent, and not just for encouraging me to go, not
Sure.
just for supporting me the whole time. I mean, he and my mother always did that. Um, but when I was down, nobody could make me laugh like my dad. I mean, he called me princess to literally till the day he died.
Right.
And I can remember one time, I think it might have been not our ring weekend. It was before that. It might have been, one of those where we're dressing up, and the women, of course, back then we're in our banquet hall waitress uniforms with the, the Desi Arnaz floofy here. And
whatever the style
they were
was,
horrible.
not good.
Oh yeah, the dress mess was awful. And I remember, and of course it's the 80s, so these girls are coming in with these big skirts and everything's satin and gloves like Madonna and the big hair.
Yeah.
And I remember telling my dad, God, Daddy, I wish just once I could take off this uniform and put on a pretty dress for one of these functions. And he said, Princess, you can take off your uniform and put on a pretty dress anytime you want. Those girls over there can never put your uniform on. It was exactly what I needed to hear.
What a wise man.
That's
right there. That's gold. Wow.
Oh, yeah. This is Tuppence. We're welcoming Tuppence to the podcast.
There we go.
She's like a circus dog. Okay.
Oh, I love it. My dog is right down here for the kids at home, so we're all good. First assignment, graduation, military police lieutenant. How did that all transpire? How did you find the Army versus West Point?
West Pointers tend to absolutely love West Point, and we have such great memories of West Point, but the vast majority of us do our time and get out.
Right.
Because the real Army, we're not enamored with it so much. So I get to Fort Hood.
Fort Hood. Okay.
Fort Hood, yep, which is now Fort Cavazos, I think, right?
It is.
Fort Cavazos?
That's right.
Okay.
Very well done. Well done. And what was it like being an MP at Fort Hood at the time, Fort Cavazos now?
In the 80s, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. And my son, who is infantry and now an 18 series, he likes saying, Mom, everybody hates you. You're an MP, so everybody hates you. We didn't know. We didn't care. We're kind of an insular little bunch. And Fort Hood being as big as it was, we had a lot of MPs running around.
Right.
And I really enjoyed it. I really got into it. I loved the law enforcement aspect. I loved the fact that we had a real mission in wartime, because there was a time, I want to say right after Vietnam, where the MP Corps was in danger of just being chopped. We're like, what do we need you guys for? We can get DOD. I mean, they have DOD police, but they had to say, no, this is what we do in wartime. We have a real wartime mission. The other thing, too, with all those deployments that were starting to happen in the 80s and the 90s, where we were going to just little hot spots all over the place. We hadn't got to the Balkans yet. Desert Storm came up. But you can send a company of MPs, and we're taught to ask questions first, then shoot. Yeah. So I really loved it because I did have a platoon. So I really felt the structure. It was like the infantry companies, but I had a better ride, You
had a platoon. So you think about a police operation. Were you out on base, or did you kind of run were you the sergeant that said, be careful out there and all that stuff?
So at Fort Hood, the MP companies would rotate. We had 3 rotations. You had your garrison rotation where you were the police for that month.
Okay.
We had a field rotation month where we'd go out just as the platoons and do our own platoon thing and really get down to some of the, platoon level or even company level tactics that we did. And then we'd have, we'd save the 3rd month for large exercises whether it was the whole brigade or 3 corps or whatever. So the month that you were on garrison duty, the platoons would rotate who was on days, nights, because it's 24/7. So we had 3 shifts. The officers, the field grade and above, they went home every night. The lieutenants and the captains, we were rotated as MP duty officer. So once or twice a month, you were MPDO, and you were basically the chief of police overnight, which when you think about it, put this little 23-year-old, I'm the chief of police overnight. It's a little, it was interesting. It was fun. Thank God for senior NCOs. There was at the MP station a cadre of NCOs and officers who that was their duty. They were in the law enforcement company.
Right.
And so they were the desk sergeants. They were the,
gotcha. They had all the infrastructure people basically had regular roles, but you would provide the people to go out
We were the
and patrol and
squads.
all that.
Yeah.
Without
So I guess
revealing any names or anything sensitive, what was the craziest situation you found yourself in as an MP?
oh, okay. One crazy, one funny come to mind. Well, this one actually, it's not so crazy, but um, it's crazy that they never taught us the laws of the states we were in, because we're like, this is federal. We do what the heck we want.
Right.
So later, as a Dallas police officer, I learned that in the state of Texas, if you have a domestic situation, like a domestic assault, one or both people are going to jail for the night, because you're going to separate those people. You're going to allow them 24 hours to cool down.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And then they're going to get acquit, or they're going to, see the magistrate, and, but we're on Fort Hood. So where are we going to take people? We had cells at the MP station where we could take people. But we didn't always do things. We didn't do things according to the laws of Texas. We did things according to what we thought were best, because we could take somebody and put them, if it was bad enough, we'd take the soldier, or if it was a dual soldier couple, you're going to go sleep at your unit and we're going to contact your commander. A lot of times we just took them to neighbors, so I can remember one.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. One where, and I don't remember, I think this guy was a warrant officer, and he got drunk and he came home and he was screaming at his wife and he started to get a little physical. She runs across the street. They were kind of like apartments. It was horrible. I hope they've torn this housing area down, but it was Comanche 3 on now Fort Cavazos.
Right.
People were living cheek by jowl on top of each other.
Right.
But she ran across the street, and it happened to be one of our classmates who lived there. And he was a Buffalo. He knows who he is, because we still remember. I'm not going to mention his name. If he watches this, he'll know. He's older than most of us. And he thought I think he thought I was just the stupidest little
He breadcrumbing it. We're going to figure it out.
You're going to figure it out. But I was like, in his eyes, I was like this ignorant little twit the whole time we were at West Point. And I kind of was, I was bogus the whole time.
You were bogus, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I had this NCO so you've got me and you've got the senior NCO who was on duty that night. And he was not from my platoon. And he's going, oh, we're going to take that guy and we're going to take him to his company. I was like, no, we're really not. Because somebody just went over, his other neighbor went over, and he just passed out drunk. And she's going to stay here and everything's going to be fine. And they all know that if they need to call in the morning, and guess what? Lieutenant so-and-so can check and make sure that everything's okay. And it was nice, because in that one incident, I turned that classmate's perception of me around, which made me very happy.
That's nice.
Yeah, but that NCO was like, we should have taken him and put him in the cells and made his commander get him. And I'm like,
he wanted
people hate
to
us
go
already. Oh my God, yeah. But I think the best thing I ever did on MP duty officer is I got really pissed, because I was married to my first husband at the time.
Right.
You guys, and here's no secret, KASK has been married and divorced twice. I am not meant to be married. I am so happy single. That's a whole another story.
Well,
but I was married to my first husband.
Yeah.
And he had gotten out and was in Dallas as a Dallas police officer.
Okay.
So that's about 2.5 hours away from Fort Cavazos. And so I would wind up being the duty officer on holidays, because I didn't have any kids yet. My husband's up there. Oh, isn't he working on Christmas? And I'm like, yeah, but I'd still like to see him,
Right.
So I get duty officer like Christmas Eve. And I'm like, oh. So I got, nothing's going on on Christmas Eve,
Right.
Even at, Fort Hood. Everything was quiet. People are on leave. People are doing things. So I got all of the squad cars, and we parked in front of our brigade commander, who was also the provost marshal, the head MP on Fort Hood. And we turned on all the squad lights and sang carols on his lawn. And he thought it was great. So
that is great.
I guess bogus lieutenant worked for me too. Yeah.
You made bogusness into a strategic
It's an art.
That's fantastic. How long did you stay in the Army doing that kind of adventurous stuff?
I was in for 5.5 years active.
Yeah.
I went to Desert Storm, came back.
You did. And, where did you find your duties in Desert Storm? Where did they take?
Where or
Yeah, where were you stationed in
oh
Saudi?
God, out in the middle of nowhere.
You're not in the middle of
We
nowhere.
started, yeah, we started at the port of Dammam,
Yeah,
right by
a garden
near
spot.
Kobar.
I've spent
Yeah, and
time
we were
there before.
actually on hard like tarmac
Mhm.
in what had been a grain yard. So they had just emptied this grain yard and we moved in.
Yeah.
And then we, by battalions, we moved out to the desert. And I was on battalion staff by then.
Okay.
So it was just in our little battalion headquarters, literally out in the middle of the desert. I mean, woke up a few times and there's like a camel trying to peek in the tent. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
don't have anything for you today. Sorry.
Now I looked at
Yeah,
your LinkedIn, and you actually went and worked for the Dallas Police Department as well.
I did.
You were a
Yeah,
Dallas cop. You were the 5-0, as the kids say.
I was. One little secret. I don't know if our classmates know this, but I was the first female rookie of the year on the Dallas Police Department
Really?
ever. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. And we thought
I was
Spirit
like,
Captain.
really
We thought
cool.
you'd peaked at Spirit Captain.
Oh, I was the first. No, I was number one in my academy class, and then
For
I was
you.
rookie of the year. It was like really cool.
So you
But you know
became a
what
little
though?
less bogus when you went to Dallas. Good for you.
I did, yeah. I mean, you still have fun. I can tell really good stories about being on the Dallas Police Department, but
I can only
um,
imagine.
it was fun. Yeah. I mean, some of them I would not tell on video. I would tell you in person
Right.
because there's a level of grossness or gore.
But you
I will say I never
can
shot
keep your
anybody.
P4 colleagues in rapt attention as another one of your crazy Buffalo reunions.
I don't know if I've told any of them some of those stories. I think they'd be like, "What? Squeaks? You did that?"
Well, there
So
you
no,
go.
I did. Yeah.
And then, but you did that for a short period of time, and then you then flipped to the insurance industry. What was the story there?
Yeah. So I was on Dallas PD for 6 years.
Oh, 6 years. Okay, that's a
Um,
decent time.
6 years, yeah, not it wasn't that short. And I will tell you, the part of town that I worked, Southeast. So if anybody knows the Dallas area, Southeast is right around the Fair Park area.
Hmm.
And at least then, and I think still, it was the most economically depressed area of
Yeah, it's a little
Dallas.
tough down there.
And unfortunately, that's where the crime goes down. So
Sure.
I think I did more in 6 years than a lot of like if you're a small town police officer get
Yeah,
to do in
you
20.
saw a lot, I bet.
So I did, yeah. And it was interesting. It was eye opening. Glad I did it. I mean, there's nothing more fun than a high speed chase. So, um, but yeah, I met my son's. Well, I re-met my son's father.
Hmm.
We had actually grown up in Connecticut. I was friends. He's a little bit younger than me. I was friends with his sister going through high school and stuff. We all went to church together. And so he moved down to Texas, and we wound up having Nick, the heir, as everybody knows him, the heir, and decided, we don't have any family down here. I mean, I'd been down in Texas for 15 years.
Right.
And I had a lot of support. I had a lot of friends. He came down there for me, not the same support structure.
Sure.
So we're like, well, both sets of grandparents are up there in Bristol and Southington, Connecticut. So let's move home. So I wound up, the colonel who we had turned on all the lights and sung Christmas carols on his, front lawn. When about my third or fourth year in the Dallas Police Department, he tried to hire me away to work for him at AIG because he was in charge of their special investigations unit.
Really? That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So they would
Yeah.
pull
And I
from
actually said no.
military police or police ranks for their investigations. Super interesting.
Oh, yeah. Most insurance companies do. So he tried to hire me away, and I was like, no. At the time, I was actually, I was doing really well. I was loving my career. I was thinking about applying. I might have already applied to the FBI, see where I would go with that. And I said, no, I'm good. Thank you. He's like, all right. But then by the time that I was going to move home to Connecticut, he was working for Travelers. And of course, Travelers Insurance is headquartered right there in Hartford. So we had kept in touch, and I got a hold of him, went to visit him in his office. Right. But he set me up with some interviews, like with the head of SIU and some other folks.
Right.
Yeah, and it's funny because he had said the head of SIU is coming in, and I didn't know I knew it was Special Investigations Unit. Right. I didn't know at that time that these people were all ex-cops. Right?
Oh, really? Yeah.
So I go into this interview. He goes, oh, yeah, the head of SIU is coming down here to our regional office in Dallas, next month. So why don't you sit and talk with him? Come on, and then we'll all go out to dinner. I'm like, okay, sir. So I go. And this guy just starts to ask me, like, tell him war stories. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, this is the weirdest interview ever. He's like, oh, have you ever done this? Oh, have you ever done that? And I'm telling things about being a Dallas cop. And it's like 45 minutes into it. And he goes, oh, by the way, when I introduced myself, I failed to tell you that I'm a retired captain from the Hartford Police Department. And I'm like, oh. And he goes, thank you for not bullshitting me. I'm like,
Wow, that's
okay. He
great.
goes,
Well, I mean,
oh, yeah.
really, all interviews for jobs are telling war stories ultimately because you're
Yeah.
actually right. So he that's actually an excellent way to check out your veracity. So that's great. Yeah.
I thought I'd go in and be a claim rep trainee. I would learn from the bottom up. How do I handle a claim? And instead, because of my background, they made me like the operations unit manager.
Okay.
So I was in charge of the phone queue and the mail room and all these support
See, that's a
roles.
credit to you because they knew quality and they wanted you on the team somehow, and so they created it.
So
That
yeah,
that actually is quite a credit to you. So good for you. Yeah.
and it was also a great spot to learn the business
Sure.
because I supported all the different lines. But I got to learn all this and I got my Connecticut license because I thought, well, this might be a good thing to have. And so I wound up as a workers' comp unit manager. I
Oh yeah.
couldn't handle a
See,
work
that's
comp
great.
claim to save my life, but I can manage people. Then I got an I wound up managing every line of business except property. And then I had it on my individual development plan that for years, I want to go to Claim U. I want to go to Claim. That is the name of our claim
Right.
learning and development department, Claim University. I want to go to Claim U, want to go to Claim U. So every time they had one of these train the trainer, like we're going to have this new program on customer service. So they'd send people to Claim U to learn it and bring it back to the claim centers. So I would train that. So every time I had the opportunity, I'd do it. So they knew up at Claim U that I wanted to go there.
Right.
My bosses knew. And then we got a new service center vice president in, and I was still a unit manager, and he interviewed all the unit managers because some of the lines weren't doing well.
Uh-huh.
And so some people wound up voluntarily leaving. Some people were asked nicely to leave. And he sat me down and he said, and what was really great is his brother was a Naval Academy grad. So he
Mhm.
said, I'm looking at your performance reviews. I'm looking at the work you do. I don't have a problem with your management style or how you're getting it done. He goes, I just have no idea how you're doing it because you've never handled a claim yourself.
Hmm.
And I said, I get good support. I ask good questions, I guess. So
Right.
he said, well, here's the deal. Claim U is never going to take you if you've never actually handled claims yourself. So I took a step back and we had outside claim reps at the time. So it was great because the air was in second grade. I was working from home. It was fabulous. So I did that for a year. And then they said, okay, come in and handle some attorney represented claims. So I did that. And then everybody who was in on this deal where I took the step back, they all got promoted and left. One of my coworkers, she was always looking for job postings for promotions and stuff. And she said, hey, they call me KSK at work. KSK, there's a job posting for Claim U. There's 2 of them. You need to go. You need to do it. And I got it.
The pinnacle. That's great. Good for you. Very, very
Yeah.
determined. Very determined. So
So
you've
I'm a
mentioned the
retired
air.
guy at a
You
Claim
mentioned the
U.
air a couple times. How did you end up in North Carolina? Well, the air is in the military. The number of
Oh,
bases
yeah.
allows us to kind of keep track of, and you kindly give us updates.
Yeah.
So what's the
So,
story?
okay. So, all right, we'll go chronologically. So the air graduated in 2017
Okay.
from high school.
Yeah.
He went right enlisted in the military.
Okay.
Yeah, because he wanted to make sure he was a ranger. So he got a ranger contract. So he went infantry down at, is it still Benning? What is it now? I have no
Fort
idea.
Moore, it's called Fort Moore. Yeah.
Now, why didn't they name this one Fort Moore? Because it's in Moore County. Okay. Um,
Above my pay grade. I'm just a podcaster.
so he went airborne ranger,
Okay.
and he got stationed out with 2nd Battalion out at Joint Base Lewis McChord,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
I assume is still Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Fort Moore is still good. Yeah.
Yeah. So he did that. Before he was getting out, he came here. Oh, okay. So he's out there. and I'm up in Connecticut with a great big house and a very small dog, not the one I have now. And things are going okay, but my parents had long ago retired and moved to Florida, as good
Sure.
grandparents should. I had separated from the heir's dad when Nick was 3. So, I'm up in this big house, and as long as I was able to go to work and go to church and do my things, everything was fine.
Right.
And then all of a sudden COVID hits, and it's me and this dog in the house, and we're just looking at each other like, what do you want to do? I don't know. You want to go out again? Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So COVID was part of the story in terms of the reload to North Carolina.
Yeah. And my mother, she wasn't, my mother, we had my dad passed, oh gosh, about 20 years ago now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear it.
22 years, daddy's been gone. Miss him every day. But my mother had decided when she turned 80, she wasn't going to drive anymore. Okay. And we said, well, you can move back to Connecticut. And she's like, no, there's a reason that I left Connecticut. So no. Or you can move to North Carolina where my brother was, because he retired out of Fort Bragg.
Okay.
So he's here with his family. So we moved her up here. She lives in one of those independent, bougie living,
right.
situations where they all eat in the dining room together. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we moved her there, and COVID hits. And actually right before COVID hit, I had kind of decided I am done. I need to move. Things were just
change it up a
needed
little
to change.
Sure.
Needed to change. Yeah. So I went to my boss at the time, and this is like on the cusp of COVID. We hadn't closed everything down yet. And I said, hey, I'm not asking if I can move. I'm planning to move to North Carolina. I'm asking if I can keep my job. And he said, well, let me talk to HR. Yeah. Let me think about it. Well, by the time he got back to me, we were all out for COVID.
Anyway.
So, yeah. And he said, okay, well, here's the deal. Because I wasn't the only one who asked. Yeah, you can move, with the caveat that once this pandemic thing is over, we may say you got to move back to Connecticut to keep your job. Yeah. Because that used to be one of the deals. To be a trainer at Claim You had to move to Connecticut.
Be a trainer,
Yeah. Right, because we had a lot of live classes. We have this beautiful training facility.
Sure.
So, and I said, well, that's okay. And I'm moving anyway. My mother's there, my brother's there, my whole family's there.
Yeah.
So I moved in December 2020 down here. Best decision ever. Oh my gosh, it was so good. Just being near my family. So I'm here, and in 2021, the heir says, hey, Mom, I'm not sure yet if I want to get out and use my GI Bill and go to college, or if maybe I want to go SF. And I said, okay, well, you're a grown man now, so you decide.
Right.
He decided that he came here for selection during COVID, and he made it. And then he went back to Lewis McChord and decided, I'm going to get out. So he was accepted at the University of Vermont. Huh. He was going to go there. He joined the Vermont National Guard because they would pay the tuition. His GI Bill would go to housing and things like that. And it didn't quite work out. I guess, I don't know if it's because the University of Vermont, I don't know if it was the timing starting in January, and when he got out was November, so everybody's gone. I don't know if they just aren't, are they more set up for 17 and 18-year-olds just getting out of high school with parental support? But yeah, so he said, I don't think I'm going. I'm not going to go to the University of Vermont anymore.
Okay.
So he said, I'm going to transfer. And I did not know until he did this. He transferred to a unit in the National Guard.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of groups in the National Guard. And he got to the group and they said, oh my gosh, you're an airborne ranger. You've already been through selection. And he was down here for the course immediately.
Wow. That's why he's in 18 series now, but he's in the National Guard Special Forces.
Yeah. So we can't show pictures of him. We cannot put anything like that out. I do not put this out on Facebook. I don't know how much of this, I should probably check with Joey Martin. Hey, how much of this can I say? Or Dan Hokinson.
He's the first stop.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm going to go to the 4-star general. Hell yeah.
Because anybody below that really doesn't know what they're talking about. They're bogus.
Right. They're bogus. Yeah. So he's doing really well. In fact, he's actually now, he started college Tuesday.
Hey, he started college. There you go.
Yeah. He's now at he's at UMass Boston now. So,
okay. Got it.
Yeah.
You have had an amazing run. I mean, from the police to the Dallas police for 6 years to 25 years as Traveler. I mean, and then within Traveler, obviously, many, many different things. Just looking back kind of 20-ish years ago, what advice would you give yourself?
Oh, wow. 20-ish years ago?
Yeah.
So 20-ish years ago, I was already at Travelers because I have my 25th anniversary. And I think I would tell myself, okay, take that ops job, but don't take all those other unit manager jobs. Walk on into somebody's office and say, hey, this is great, but I've got my Connecticut adjuster's license and I really, really need to learn how to handle claims. And I think I would have told myself that. And then I probably would have gone back to being a unit manager, but I would have had I wouldn't have got to claim you any sooner because, yeah, you did have to wait for somebody to die or retire. And it's kind of getting there again. But yeah, I think I was backwards. I was in management and then I took a step back. And so some people look at that, in your career and go, well, what happened here? And I have to explain and say, okay, this was a conscious decision and I got to do all the communications to say, this is why this is happening. This is not a step back. This is, maybe it's one step back to take two steps forward.
Okay.
So I think I would do that. I think I would also, there was a point about 20-ish years ago where I was feeling a little bit miserable with insurance. And I would tell myself, just hang in there because it gets good. And I am now considered a subject matter expert, not just at Claim You, but at Travelers in certain areas.
Good for you.
Because I chose that. And I mean, it sounds boring as hell. Like I tell people, I am a commercial auto subject matter expert. I am a general liability commercial auto expert. But it's funny, people call me.
All the way back to 1986, you have a tendency to get in the middle of things. I know for one of the ways that you and I connected was you were kind of the queen bee of that bulletin board back in pre-Facebook days. And you played a really important role kind of getting us all on that. And that was my way that I reconnected with the class because I had actually not been in much touch at all. But the bulletin board kind of got me back in touch with folks like yourself and others. So you're always kind of in the center of things. So the fact that you're a subject matter expert at Travelers is no surprise to any of us.
Okay. I guess what's funny, though, is that so many people thought I was the admin for that email bulletin board. It's still out there.
And that's kind of your superpower, right? You people just assume you're in charge.
I think I'm in charge.
Katherine Anne Stewart-Kelly, KASK Squeaks. What an absolutely fantastic conversation. We love you to death. You are always our spirit captain. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. Love everybody, all the 86. And I realize I've not looked at the camera once. I love you guys and I mean it. You know it.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.